Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to urge the Senate to take up a clean Homeland Security appropriation bill and pass it without further delay. I know that we've had several votes on the floor on proceeding, and I would just urge the leadership to make it clear that we stand on record for a clean Homeland Security appropriation bill. We have an obligation to protect the American people. Given the terrorist threat we face both at home and abroad, it is irresponsible to continue to fund the Department of Homeland Security with short-term budgets and bring them to the edge of an agency shutdown. We also should not force hardworking federal workers to stand in the crossfire between Congress and the President. Providing the resources that our federal, state, and local law enforcement officers need to carry out their vital, around-the-clock mission should not be caught up in the partisan political disagreements. We need a clean appropriation bill for the Department of Homeland Security. We face a dangerous world today in light of recent terrorist attacks throughout Europe, Asia, and North America, and the ongoing threat of ISIS. I know I expressed the views of all members of the Senate, our deep condolences and prayers to the Kayla Mueller family as we learned today of her fate at the hands of ISIS. ISIS is actively recruiting foreign fighters that are being radicalized, and they return to their home countries, including countries in Europe and North America. We need to fully fund, without further delay, uncertainty or another short-term budget, the critical Homeland Security, law enforcement, and intelligence activities and programs of the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. President, we are now 4 months into the fiscal year. 1/3 of the fiscal year is already over for the Department of Homeland Security. We should not keep funding DHS on short-term budgets. No agency or private business, for that matter, can effectively implement a budget and carry out its mission under this type of financial tightrope. How would you like to run a business, not knowing whether your budget's going to be there starting March the 1st? How do you plan? How do you make the type of commitments for the year to carry out your mission when you don't know whether you're going to have the budget support starting March 1st, whether it's going to be continued on a continuing resolution, whether you have to go through a government shutdown, or whether you're going to have a budget? You can't run an agency that way. DHS Secretary Jeb Johnson has stated that if Congress continues to fund his agency on short-term budgets, that it will harm its mission and the programs of the agency. We created the Department of Homeland Security in response to the devastating attack on our country on September the 11th. For example, short-term funding may limit more aggressive counterterrorism efforts, weaken our cybersecurity protections against hackers trying to corrupt or steal our data, delay enhancements to aviation security, slow down new border security initiatives, and defer new grants to state and local law enforcement. DHS may have to delay or postpone contract awards or new acquisitions, which also hurt small businesses and hurt our economy. DHS will have to scale back employee training and postpone the hiring of new personnel. We have broad bipartisan support on almost all aspects of this $40 billion Homeland Security funding measure. This legislation funds critical agencies, including Coast Guard, Transportation Security Administration, TSA, Federal Emergency Management, FEMA, Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, and the Secret Service, just to mention a few of the agencies that come under the Department of Homeland Security. 3 former heads of the Department of Homeland Security, including both under Democrat and Republican administrations, recently wrote a letter to Congress urging us to pass a clean Homeland Security appropriation bill and avoid another short-term funding measure, or worse yet, a government shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security at the end of February. So let me just quote from the part of the letter from the former Homeland Security Secretaries Ridge, Chertoff, and Napolitano, who represent, again, both Democratic and Republican administrations. And I quote from their letter to us, their letter. "We write to you today to respectfully request that you consider decoupling critical legislation to fund DHS in fiscal year 15 from a legislative response to President Obama's executive action on immigration. The President has said very publicly that he will oppose any legislative effort to undermine the executive actions that he has taken on immigration. Therefore, by tethering a bill to fund DHS in FY 2015 to a legislative response to the President's executive action on immigration, the likelihood of a DHS shutdown increases. The letter continues, "We do not question your desire to have a larger debate about the nation's immigration laws. However, we cannot emphasize enough that DHS's responsibilities are much broader than its responsibilities to oversee the federal immigration agencies and to protect our borders. And funding for the entire agency should not be put in jeopardy by the debate about immigration. It is imperative that we ensure that DHS is ready, willing, and able to protect the American people. To that end, we urge you not to risk funding for the operations that protect every American and to pass a clean DHS funding bill," end quote. 3 former secretaries of the Department of Homeland Security, working for both Democrats and Republicans. Mr. President, what if Congress allows DHS funding to lapse on February 27th? And that's the end of the current funding resolution. We would then ask critical frontline personnel like Border Patrol agents and air marshals to work without pay. That's insulting to these law enforcement officers that are putting their lives on the line to keep Americans safe every day. That's insulting to the families of these law enforcement officers who depend on a steady paycheck to make ends meet. And that's insulting to the American people who deserve nothing less than world-class service from government officials. I must tell you, we've gone through government shutdowns before. It hurts people, no question about it. But guess who gets hurt the most? Taxpayers of this country. It ends up costing us more. We don't save taxpayer dollars. It ends up costing us more, jeopardizing the mission and putting individual families at risk. Let me give you one example that many of our states and localities know very well. It is the Emergency Management Grant Program. Many local fire, police, and emergency management officials rely on funding from the Homeland Security Grant Program, which provides funds to states, territories, and other local governments to prevent, protect against, and respond to potential terrorist attacks and other hazards. Now, this is a program that the local governments rely upon. They don't know whether they're going to get any of these funds after March 1st. How do they plan? Local officials as well rely on funding from FEMA's Emergency Management Performance Grants. These grants help them to prepare for the unexpected, whether it's a natural disaster or some type of terrorist activities. It allows them to be prepared. And these funding, we require this training. It's 50% federal funds, 50% local funds. Well, how do they make arrangements to set up these training if they don't know whether the federal funds are going to be there? I can speak for the state of Maryland. We have a very tough budget. Our governor's trying to figure out how he's going to make ends meet. He doesn't have the resources to advance the federal shares. That's no way for us to work in federalism with our local governments when we have a partnership to keep everyone safe. So I can mention many other programs that are in jeopardy of not being funded if we don't pass a clean bill. So let me just, in conclusion, address the issue of immigration. Due to many extraneous amendments that were added by the House to the Homeland Security Appropriation Bill, we have this challenge here in the Senate. The President has made it clear that he will veto any bill that expressly limits his authority to exercise prosecutorial discretion on immigration matters. While we agree our current immigration system needs comprehensive reform, including border security enhancements, this appropriation bill is not the place for that debate. No matter what side of this debate you are on, most of us agree that the American immigration system is badly broken. Comprehensive immigration reform is long overdue. We need a balanced immigration system that is fair. My strong preference is that Congress send the President a comprehensive immigration reform bill that he can sign into law. This would provide a more thorough and more permanent solution than executive action. The Senate passed a bipartisan bill in the last Congress, and I'm sure we can do so again. My hope is that the House will take it up soon so that we can come together in a bipartisan way, reconcile our differences, and pass comprehensive immigration reform as a separate bill. Funding for the Department of Homeland Security expires Friday, February 27th, which is now less than 3 weeks away. One of those weeks, we're not scheduled to be in session because of the district work period. The Senate should act now to pass a clean Homeland Security bill and send it to the President without further delay. That's in the best interest of the American people. With that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.